So I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel discussion, one of the Tech for Good ecosystem ones, and today's talk is Aggregate and Amplify. I'm Jane Morrison-Ross, the Chief Exec of South of Scotland Enterprise, and we are here today to talk about the Tech for Good ecosystem and what has happened partly over the last year. The Tech for Good ecosystem has done a great job in response to the crisis over the last year, but now we have the opportunity to look ahead and to look far beyond that. There are huge challenges ahead, and we want to create a real step change in the impact that the Tech for Good ecosystem can deliver in Scotland, and look at how we do that collaboratively. I have a fantastic panel here today to help us with that. So going round my screen, we have Alistair Forbes, and I will ask the panel to introduce themselves properly. We have Alistair Forbes, we have Marcella Boyle, we have Ilaria Albanese, and Jeff Huggins. So Alistair, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much, Jane. I'm Alistair Forbes. I was one of the founders of the Scottish Tech Army and now have the role of Chief Exec within the Tech Army.
Thank you very much, Marcella.
Hi, I'm Marcella Boyle. I'm Chief Exec of the Hymans Robertson Foundation. I joined in 2019. We have a very strong focus on supporting charities, particularly those that support young people into employment, into positive futures, and a much wider engagement with our local communities as well.
Ilaria.
Hi, I'm Ila Albanese, and I'm a program manager for the Force for Good program at JP Morgan. So the Force for Good program pairs up our technologists with nonprofit organizations, and over the course of 8 months, they create some technology solutions for these organizations, dedicating about 4 hours a week to this work. And Force for Good is part of our umbrella organization, which is Tech for Social Good, and that this year is actually at its 10th anniversary. So it was established about 10 years ago as part of JP Morgan.
Fantastic. And Jeff?
I'm Jeff Huggins. I'm a director at the Scottish Government. I'm currently working on digital in the third sector. I've spent most of the last 3 years out working in NHS technology. And prior to that, I was the Director of Digital Health and Care and the Director of Health and Social Care Integration at the Scottish Government.
Fantastic, thank you. Great expertise and really a really good variety of views, I hope, for the discussion. To kick us off then, where are the gaps in the ecosystem currently, and what can we do collaboratively to close them and make what we're trying to do here even more powerful? Who would like to start with that one?
Well, I'll tentatively take a step forward and make a start. And I say tentatively because I'm kind of the newcomer in this space, really. Prior to the launch of the Tech Army last year, I hadn't really had much involvement in the Tech for Good ecosystem, to be honest. And I think our observation has been that if it's not too much of a tautology, the gap is in the gaps, in that there are many really worthwhile initiatives that are already taking place in a Tech for Good sense. Ila talked about, it's 10 years since JP Morgan have been doing this, which is amazing. I didn't even know that before we came on this call. And similarly, the other participants in the call, very active in the space. I think what really encouraged us in the Tech Army to think about migrating from what was very much a crisis response organization into something that is intended to be around for the longer term was in this area of the coordination and the working together in the Tech for Good ecosystem. So that for me is one of the things that I'm really keen that we can explore and that we can help to make a start on trying to close those gaps. But really interested to hear on the observations from the others who've got a lot of experience in this space.
Marcella, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. If I could come in, I think there's been a fantastic amount of work done over the last 18 months, pre-pandemic and during, and we're still going through this. And more gaps emerge as we continue to go through. We're not even into recovery stage yet. It's only today in Scotland that we've had more easing. We still have a lot of support of vulnerable young people, communities. not receiving one-to-one personal support yet. So I think more gaps will definitely emerge. I think Scottish Tech Army and the rest of the Tech for Good ecosystem has actually done a fantastic job remotely supporting. But I think what I'm hearing, particularly from the charity sector that I work with and a larger piece of work that I'm doing with funders, we all recognise that we're not quite where we should be even yet. And we don't know what latent demand there's going to be for more solutions to help people fully recover. So I think, where are the gaps? They're still emerging for me, because there's certainly gaps around funding for the charity sector and the third sector generally. There's a real concern about how charities in the third sector have actually going to support itself through reserves, if they can do that. We're seeing funding actually largely finishing around summertime in terms of Adapt and Thrive, and other funding mechanisms actually being withdrawn, quite rightly. But we do need to think about what recovery looks like. And some of those gaps will undoubtedly be around leadership, and leadership both in terms of technology, e-enablement, etc., but wider skills gaps too. And maybe the ecosystem can play a larger part in that development for the staff and workforce and volunteers as third sector.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jeff, from your point of view, are there points you'd like to pick up on there?
Yeah, I'm sort of interested in Marcella's points there, because I think most of the gaps are probably around capability. My experience has been that anytime you think that you've invented a new product, somebody's done it before you. I remember we did a Tech for Good event probably back in 2013, and as part of that, we developed this idea of a biofeedback squeeze ball, which would help you regulate your mood. And I was working with an experienced team on this, and they worked out, they thought it would cost us maybe $100 to prototype it. So we went online to take a look, and we discovered somebody had already invented it in Norway or Sweden, and they prototyped it for $12 by making it out of bubble wrap. So I guess from that, what I take is the technology probably exists. So it's about the transferability, the availability, the confidence, and the capability, and those are those are probably a harder challenge than creating new technology. But I think that's probably where most of the gaps are.
Absolutely. Ela, welcome back. I'm sorry we lost you, but we're delighted to have you rejoin. And we're talking about the gaps in the tech ecosystem, not tech infrastructure.
Apologies.
No, not at all. We've all been there. We were just talking, Ela, about the gaps that people might have come across in the tech ecosystem in Scotland. I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to add to that.
I think especially, I don't know if this has been mentioned, and again, apologies, I had some connection issues, but I think one of the biggest gaps that we've seen, especially within the nonprofit sector, is a gap of resources. So there's a lack of resources, whether they be resources in terms of knowledge around technology, but also resources to be able to implement that technology. And that is a gap that Force for Good is actively working to fill. So what we do is really try and support organizations to implement this technology, but not only provide with them with the skills from our technologies to implement it, but also with the knowledge to then empower them to support these solutions long term. So I think that that upskilling, that focus on sustainability and being able to long term expand the mission and or being able to advance the mission of an organization through technology is one of the main points around which we are all focusing, and we all focus on this panel today.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting point, the sustainability piece and the longer term view as we hopefully start to edge our way out of the COVID and crisis response piece. How do you think we can, I suppose, aggregate and amplify the message of the work that's going on just now in Scotland, and as part of that, really reach the people that we need to reach to let them know what's happening and that the support is there?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the last year is that the good news is that there's a tremendous amount of will to start bringing these things together. We've had many conversations with lots of different organizations, and there are a great many threads that are in common between them. So I think the will is certainly there. I think one of the things that's been a challenge is really interested to hear, Jeff, you saying that you were running an event in 2013 on this. I'd be interested to get your thoughts, reflecting on that, what came from that, and are there any lessons we can take forward here? But for us, definitely, this event is very much designed to start that process, and to be able to bring together all these different organizations, and as part of that, start making the connections that will mean that, again, to Jeff's point, we're not going back and creating the same thing 5 times. We can create it once, and we can make it available to many organizations, and we can draw on the skills of many different participants in the ecosystem. And again, the point about something being prototyped in Norway or Sweden is fascinating, because I think we do tend to be a bit parochial sometimes in these kind of things. So I think we do need a broader view. As everybody will know, we've got the keynote this afternoon from the CEO of Code for America. So I think it'd be great to get that kind of input. We've got also someone from AI for Good, London-based organisation. So really keen to see how we can start bringing all this together.
Thanks, Alistair. I think that's a really good point, and the point Jeff made earlier as well. Sometimes it's difficult to really navigate the landscape in Scotland, never mind the broader ecosystem, nationally and internationally. And I suppose part of that is how we spread the message about what's happening in Scotland. And certainly, things like the Connecting Scotland programme, the formation of Scottish Tech Army during the COVID crisis, these were really innovative, unusual activities. How do we get the word out internationally about what's happening here in Scotland and the work all of you are doing?
Jane, if I could maybe come in, I'm not going to disagree with that at all, but I do think, we talk about Scotland's a village, but there's still a large proportion of potential beneficiaries of STA and ecosystem generally that is just not seeing the opportunity. And I think Hila makes a really good point, which is about, it's their willingness to engage and then have the longer term view that this might hurt. You're changing how you do things, and you need to bring staff with you. And it's more difficult to do that because not all the staff or your volunteers are in the same place where you can brief them. So then that takes another couple of steps. So I don't disagree with what you're saying about we do have a really good story to tell in terms of response. But as I mentioned earlier, we're not even touching the edges of recovery yet. And I think there's an awful lot of small organisations who might just not come back in the third sector. Yeah. And what we really need to think about is how we nurture community-based, the micros, the small third sector organisations that have the potential to respond to local communities and also support the mid and large. So I would really encourage, in terms of amplifying, more advisory networks getting involved with the ecosystem. There's really established organisations like the Chambers and others. It would be great to see a far more sort of virtuous network of advisors coming together. And digital is part of it, tech enablement is part of it, but it's actually much more about an ecosystem to support the third sector, and STA in the tech side also has its really important place. So we need to partner more effectively, I think, right across the board, and make it really easy for the third sector to engage with real experts.
That's
I think you raised...
Sorry, Ela. I was just going to say I love the idea of the virtuous network. I think that's wonderful. Ela.
No, I was going to say, I think you touched on a really interesting point around the impact that is going to have long-term on organizations, because absolutely a lot of smaller organizations are not going to be able, unfortunately, to come back from the impact that COVID has had on them. But I think that those organizations that have been able to adapt, that have been able to implement a digital transformation to, better serve their communities during this time are the ones that are going to expand further, are the ones that have been able to really amplify their message, and that have discovered through this unfortunate circumstances the power that really technology can have for them to serve their communities. And those that were maybe smaller organizations that tended to serve a local community now have the possibility to have an impact on a broader audience as well. And that is what I think is a really big piece in the amplification message that we're talking about today.
Thank you, Ela. Jeff, to kind of come round a little bit there, what do you think the role of the government, Scottish government particularly, is in this?
Well, I'm working through that at the moment, and at this stage it's probably a bit early to say. I guess what I would say is, though, that as we sort of go through this process, what we can see is that there's a relatively small number of problems that organisations are trying to fix. So there's a question about how they manage their customer or their client base or their volunteers. There's questions about how they do video conferencing. There's things like how they might do an online advice shop. There's processes like referrals. So if we think about it in terms of the verbs, it's sort of like search or help or whatever, but it's a relatively small number of challenges that most organizations have, which they probably want to be able to adapt and take forward in their particular way. But we don't understand the problem that way. We understand it as 25,000 different organizations trying to solve each of their missions. Whereas, so I guess our mental model at the moment doesn't feel as though it's in the right place. And if we saw it in those, in terms of solving common problems rather than individual problems, but understanding that in doing so, that needs to respect the different missions of organizations, I think we could make progress more quickly. I think one of the things which I've certainly seen is, while funding has been available, the model that we fund each organization separately to go out and find a solution, when many of them might not feel particularly confident in their choice or in knowing what to do, it feels as though it's maybe very valuable. It's done some really great work, but probably not the model going forward. I would imagine that many organizations, if they were told, we'll help you do this, rather than we'll give you money to go and do it, would prefer the former. So that suggests to me that there's probably a need for something in the system which is able to fulfill that function, in a way.
And would you see that then as being something in the system that could help to aggregate those organizations, so find the ones that share common challenges or common opportunities and find a way of aggregating that so the solution can be created once for a number of them?
It could be part of that. I think certainly what's come out of the discussions is that general awareness raising is good, maturity is improving, leadership's had investment, there's been work on cyber. But in terms of the support to an individual organization to access some existing technology, that appears to be where it begins to become a bit weaker, in that sort of one-to-one, curated support that enables an organization to take a step forward. So certainly in terms of, we've had a number of different conversations about what you might describe as the Lego blocks of the system, or the minimum tech stack, or different things like that. And I think that's part of the future, but I think we need to not imagine even with that we need to build it, and that most of those components exist already. The example I give is, often in technology we use this sort of the skateboard, scooter, motorbike analogy. And one of the scooter component of that's really interesting to me. So about 3 years ago, I spent a couple of weeks in Washington, DC, which I do fairly regularly. And everywhere there you go, there are electric scooters. And nobody invented the electric scooter that you can basically utilize with your credit card. What we have is we have GPS technology, plus payment technology, plus app technology, plus battery technology, plus an ecosystem of people who pick them up and charge them. So what you see is an assembled solution, which met a need. And I think we need to think that way, rather than we're going to start from scratch and build a new product solution.
Yeah.
I
Ela,
think
you're
that is
nodding.
that's a very valid point, and I think that is something that I've seen within my role as well, because as we try and support a variety of organizations that have their own identity, their own specific, user base, they have their own specific constraints. We find, as you're saying, Jeff, again and again, the same problems coming up. But every time they need to be adjusted and tailored to the specific organization. So I think that absolutely the way that we approach these problems as well is to go for something that is already on the market. We don't want to reinvent the wheel every time and then adapt, like go that last mile coding as we define it, to tailor the solution to the specific organizations. Because I think that when we think about let's create a solution once and then distribute it more widely, we lose on the nuance of what each specific organization needs, because no organization is going to have exactly the same need as each other, but all organizations are going to need to perform some of those basic functions, like, for example, track their donors and keep track of the constituents that they support. So absolutely, that.
Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes left for this part of the discussion, and we will have some time for question and answer after that. To pick up on the other side of that part of the discussion in terms of the government and public support, what can we do to continue to make sure that the larger corporate organizations are engaged in this? Some of them responded incredibly well in the beginning. What do we do? You respond very quickly there.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really fascinating part of it to me. And obviously we've got Ila with us from JP Morgan, which is one of those larger corporates. We only got to know about the work that they do in this area quite recently, and I've been so impressed. But we also have another organization that's participating today, Aggregate Technology, which is a much, much smaller organization. We've been blown away by the way they've responded and stepped up to this. One of the things that we saw most obviously at the very outset of our existence was the willingness of the people within the tech sector to get involved in this kind of thing as volunteers. I think the companies that they've come from have received benefit back. So I think this is an area where, this is one of the really big step changes that we can make. And if it's not too impertinent, Jane, I'm really interested in your opinion on this from your previous role as CEO of Scotland Is.
Thank you. I'll just spring that one on me, Alistair. I think there are, some of it's the landscape piece again. There's a lot of organizations like JP Morgan that are doing some incredible work out there, but we don't always hear about it, and we don't always know exactly where that's happening. We did see a huge number of companies within the industry step up really quickly at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and some of those engaged in the Connecting Scotland program really quickly. Some of them provided free data bundles, devices. Some of them, like, if I name one, I'll have to name them all, but some of them responded really quickly to help Scottish Government create databases to aggregate all of the offers of support across the technology sector to charitable third sector and other organisations. I think it's that value that they get back that we need to keep reminding them of as well, and holding that mirror up to say, look what you did, look what was achieved on the back of that collaboration. It was pretty unique, but if we can do it in that crisis mode, what can we do if we make this part of how we work, part of that business as usual piece?
And I think that there's, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ila.
Sure. Ila, then Marcella, and then Jeff.
I was only going to say about that piece of the wins that the organization itself also gets. One of the raison d'etre of Force for Good is that learning that employees also get through putting their skills at the service of these non-profit organizations. So it's not only a win for the company in terms of strengthening their relationship with the community, of increasing their employee satisfaction, but it's also a win in terms of development of the workforce. And that is something that I think not all of the organizations necessarily recognize immediately, because it's a learning that doesn't happen all at once. It's through this continuous engagement with our reality that is entirely different from what they might be used to in their daily life, that employees really get to put themselves in the shoes of their users, think through challenges that are very different from the ones that they face in their business as usual work. And then they're able to apply that thinking, those skills back to their job, and it brings back that value to the company itself. So
that's a hugely good point. It's a unique opportunity for them. Marcella.
Yeah, I'd really like to build on both Alistair and what Ela's just said. You know, in terms of corporate engagement, Scotland's actually pretty good at this. You know, there's very few corporates that don't have a corporate social responsibility, that they don't have active voluntary programs. And, you know, the foundation that I work with is fully funded by Hymans Robertson LLP. It's a UK-wide pensions consulting and advisory firm. And we're incredibly lucky because we, as a foundation, create the opportunities for the staff in LLP to actually go and volunteer. So it can be with foundation charity partners, but equally it can be with our community-based organisations. It could be fundraising for those too. It's not just about the funding, it's about the match giving, it's about the volunteering on top of it. So it's that really nice package of support that's available to charities. And we recently had a skilled volunteering event all around digital just 3 weeks ago. We had 70 staff, and it could have been much more than that. So there's a real willingness from corporate, and corporate is a collection of hundreds and thousands of individuals that want to do good. So it's the corporates that create the policies to allow the release of people like Ela to come into the system and really benefit the people she's working with, but also receive the professional benefit that she's just talked about. You know, I don't think we can talk it down. We shouldn't talk it up too much either.
Yeah.
Some other corporates could step in and do a bit more. But I think, you know, if we build on what is already known and encourage more of the corporates and the public sector to actually use more of their volunteering time to do good, that would be a really good start.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Jeff, I know you were trying to come in.
Yeah, I guess it was more generally in the context of the engagement with the corporate world and maybe the larger technology companies, because certainly one of the elements that's appeared in the last few weeks in the conversation is maybe a slight distrust of that, a sense that in the same way that we can see not-for-profits delivering services, one of the services that not-for-profits might offer to themselves is effectively technology support. I think that's different from volunteering, although again, making volunteering something that is equally available to people outside big companies as well as small companies would be something to look at. But I guess there's questions about the nature of the relationships with the larger industry as well that people are certainly beginning to raise.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think certainly last year, some of the work that Alistair and I were involved with, we saw some behavioural changes, I think, in the way some of the larger technology companies were responding. And I'm hopeful that on the back of that and the back of what everybody's lived through over the last year, there might be some lasting positive legacies that come out of that, and how we do continue that engagement in that sustainable long-term way as well. Alistair, would you want to add anything else to that with your lived experience over the last year?
Well, I think just, it's fascinating. As part of this conversation, you mentioned, it was mentioned earlier in the conversation that a database had been created of companies that had volunteered to provide support. Actually, I think one of the takeaways for us from this event can be that we can set up some kind of repository where we can start to track what is happening, and we can share that information. So I think on that aggregate and amplify theme, the more we can pull information around what's going on already and share it, I think the more we can help reinforce what is a very positive trend.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. I know I know Scotland were overwhelmed by, additionally, outside of the offers of help that went straight to the Scottish Government, we had 300 SMEs across Scotland come directly to offer support, free services, products, and everything else. And it was really quite unprecedented. And in my new role, I would be very interested in that one point of contact to find out what is happening across the landscape, and also how we can target our volunteers and our CSR work to fit in with that too. So I'd be interested from both perspectives on that one, Alistair. Yes, please.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Well, I think that brings us to time for Q&A. So we will open the session up now to the audience and invite questions for our very wonderful panel here today.